Library. For those who do not know, this is the first African American library in the nation, ran by a completely African American staff. We have the African American archives downstairs. If you ever want to come and check out what we have, just make an appointment and we'll get you on our schedule. We hope that you will come and join us for programs coming up in the future, such as on November the 20th at 10:30 a.m. We will have Gilda's Club and Kayak that have partnered together at the Republic Bank YMCA at 18th and Broadway. They will come and share the services they have to offer for anyone that has dealt with cancer. And coming up in March is the Cotter Cup, which is a poetry writing contest for youth in elementary through high school. So stay tuned for more information on that. Now to why we have gathered here tonight. We're very pleased to have Bernard Clay with us this evening, reading from his first volume of poetry, English Lit. Bernard is a Louisville, Kentucky native who grew up in the shadow of the now demolished Southwick housing projects in the west end of Louisville. He has spent most of his life in Kentucky cultivating an appreciation over the years for the state's disappearing natural wonders in unique but sparse urban areas. He received an MFA in creative writing from the University of Kentucky Creative Writing Program and is a member of the Affirmation Poets Collective. His work has been published in various journals and anthologies. He currently resides on a farm in eastern Kentucky with his herbalist wife, Lauren, who is the founder of Resilient Roots. So please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you for everyone who showed up. I know it's a Wednesday, I know it's 6 o'clock, right after work, in the middle of the week, hump day, so I really do appreciate everybody who showed up. I also like to thank Natalie, all the staff here at the Western Branch, Tony for his help, Susan for bringing Carmichael's here. I also like to thank all the tech people for setting up all this technical stuff. So I just want to get all the thank yous and appreciations out of the way. I'm very humbled by all this stuff being done for me to read to you guys. I'm also very excited to read here because just a few steps away, which way? That way, is my high school, Central High. And I would not be a poet if I did not go to Central High, or probably if this library didn't exist. I came to this library, it was my babysitter for freshman, sophomore year. My mother worked at the L&N building during my younger primary days, and when I would get sent down there by bus, I would walk up here and just sit here and read books. So this library holds a lot of significance for me. When given a chance to read here, I jumped at it. So I'm very, very humbled and appreciative for being able to read here. So who is Bernard Clay and why is he reading this poetry to you guys? I'm from Louisville. I was born and raised here in Louisville, like the introduction says. And so I write from a perspective of a black person growing up in Louisville. And it may seem dystopian, but only because being black in this society is sort of dystopic. My mom, who is here, she was like, don't read anything racially motivated. And I was like, or what you say, racially contentious. And I was like, oh, they all that, Mom. I'm sorry. They're gonna have to get used to that. So I'm gonna give you a breakdown. I'm gonna go through my poems. I'm gonna read a condensed list of poems just to give you like a taste test of Bernard, or at least what's in the book. Generally, the book talks about family, place, and things that happen in a societal, systematic way. And so the first poem is called English Lit, and it's named after, it's the title of the book. It's derived from a poem that I wrote while at the University of Kentucky, which is a PWI. How many people know what a PWI is? It's a predominantly white institution. And so if you're black in a PWI, sometimes you feel othered. So this poem is about that. And it sort of exemplifies what the book as a whole sort of talks about. This sense of being another and not included. It's called English Lit. Has cussing, trigger warning. English lit ain't never meant shit to me. A griot from Urban Decay, I care less about the way the Middle English or even their contemporaries display their masturbation, aka mastery of a native tongue sprung from spliced together stolen components of failed conquest-thirsty cultures. Meanwhile, I carry a $80 leather-bound 50-pound edition that I don't even read, sitting in classrooms full of white girls who aspire to be teachers or pontificating writers like the self-absorbed ones up front, jacking their egos for hours straight about imagined, intricate, insignificant details of forced literary regurgitations and their slightly different postmodern imitations. They talk about my limitations on my papers and in my daily speech. Yet, I still continue to reach to the streets, representing, even though they be hinting with C minuses and D pluses that my attempts at writing should cease and desist. But my claim to fame is not only as a writer, but also an arsonist. Because every time my pen and paper hit, I receive great joy at watching the Queen's English being lit. So I'm gonna stay on this theme, and feel free to clap, give me some feedback, because this is a conversation. I mean, don't clap if you don't want to clap, but if you don't, I'm not one of those people that are like, hey, do this. No, have at it. This is a conversation we're having. So I'm going to stick with school, and I'm going to talk about, so I went to this school called Carter, traditional, and it's no longer around, but if you know about traditional schools here in Louisville, they're schools where you get on a certain track in elementary and you continue on through Male, or what's another one, Ballard? No, not Ballard, Butler, right? So those are the traditional schools where you get trained to be very traditional. Anyway, I went to that school. My mom wanted me to get ahead, so she wanted me to go to a good traditional school. And I wrote about the first field trip that we went on. It's called Field Trip. A first grade excursion to the zoo becomes a safari. Through the neighborhood that surrounds the school that most of my classmates are bused to every morning. We barrel through dense poverty and lush decay. Some kids bury their gaze into seatbacks like ostriches. Some kids leer out the pains, eyes popping like lemurs. Some kids look back at me like I'm a gazelle chased by a cheetah, surrounded by lions. Misreading their attention, I act as an exotic guide, answering questions about the flora and fauna, even pointing out my home to a collective gasp and a pity glance. Then the chaperone, Mom, steps in. I lived there too. Before this place went to hell, all the kids' mouths are agape like hippos. Then the mom's face turns baboon butt red, and she apologizes for swearing. The rest of the way through industrial parks, we fog the window, singing Old MacDonald like a flock of egrets and one crow until we get to where the real animals are. Thank you. The next poem. Okay, so I'm gonna read about Louisville. So I have a few poems in there about Louisville. I'm not gonna read all of them because it would take up the whole reading. But I want to read a couple of readings about, so growing up, you hear a lot of talk about the negative effects of segregation, but you hardly ever hear the negative impacts of integration. So everything has positives and negatives. Most people don't think about integration in a negative way, but I was lucky enough to have a free-thinking mother. This is called 28th and Catalpa. In the 80s, on walks to the bus stop, Mom would fill in the exposed, empty, burned-out spaces of entire city blocks, augmenting reality to a pre-riot state. So where Mom sees a soda fountain shop, tasting the bubbly bite of root beer, waited on, at the front counter instead of getting it to go at the back door, as she watches the bustle of brown pedestrians in business attire passing by like this is a baby Harlem, I see nothing but a headless structure with graffiti boarded eyes on a 20-year death fall into a puddle of bricks. And over there, at that department store-sized gunshot wound at the corner of 28th and Catalpa, her eyes take her shopping at the Black-run department store. She peruses phantom owls, trying on polyester garments at the only department store she's allowed to at the time. And across the street at that Cinemaplex, she sits in the front row, not the balcony, flinching her way through 7 watchings of the Hitchcock's The Birds. I just stare through the dead theater's scorched rib bones jutting up from its shelled carcass, the gray Louisville skyline barely visible through the murk. Mom would sometimes say, "They tricked us into thinking separate was bad. We get that reminder every time we walk through this place so we can pay bus fare to reach their equality." As we wait in this haunted crematorium, which in the morning fog still smoldered like it did the day after King was assassinated. So, I don't know if you realize this, but well into the late 80s, on that corner of 28th and Catalpa, there were burnt out buildings still from the 69 riots, or 68 riots. They were not cleaned up until the 90s. And so this was sort of a commentary. We had props here to show that, oh, this is what integration looked like, and it was just burnt out. It was very, 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 very good thing to see as a young person. Okay, so I'm gonna read another poem. This one is about public transportation. I wrote this back in 1994, so this is talking about TARC buses back in the 90s. But I haven't wrote a TARC lately. I'm pretty sure some of this stuff might be still accurate. I still ride the TARC blase. I still ride the TARC buses with their pissy smelling seats, gum stuck to feet, odor of butt and malt liquor, overhead fluorescent light flickers, backbench full of shopping bags, seats tattooed with graffiti tags, redundant ringing of stop bells, old vets spitting tall tales, lames and flyaway collars, dudes peeping girls itching to holler, grease spots on the windows that seep from hair, from bums stretched out asleep and just don't care. Little badass kid screams, old lady evil eye beams, headphones blasting until ears are sore, old transfers and pay stubs littering the floor, disproportionate abundance of the black race, bus drivers clutching cans of mace. When shipping us goods from the hoods to the malls, this concrete ship rarely stalls, rushing us to serve on the trip out, our bodies being route, economically packed from the front to the back, and them raising all the prices all the time to be middle passage confined in the belly of the steel beast. And when us suburban laborers are released by drivers late, they demonstrate an attitude. That's when I get rude. Because on the way back to our shanty township, buses break down and be ill-equipped, worn seat vinyl and bald tires, and drivers who in 2 days will retire. So I get home at midnight, my work journey hours equaling 10, and the next day, guess what? I gotta do it all again. Just the blase, on that TARC every day. Why? It's my only way. I wrote this before, I don't have any better word to say it, the assassination of Breonna Taylor. I wrote this before the assassination of Breonna Taylor. But after Sandra Bland. Sandra Bland's incident struck me very deeply, and so this poem is sort of talking about, this is called Corporal Training. It starts at home, hand to butt, simple enough, then escalates as you grow. Green switches open up legs, then belt welts back, then palm swells cheek, bald fist quakes skull, and what was always to follow? I did it because I love you. And you begin to build calluses. First grade, your nervous teacher recommends you for psychoanalysis. Second and third grade, you're strategically paired with 2 surrogate mammies to control you. Fifth grade, white teacher got to paddle you like a true Hoosier deserves. 2 paddle whacks and a Denzel glory tear down your cheek. Then at that age, when you could be charged as an adult, nightsticks press into your sternum while you watch a mother's head get driven into blacktop as her son's throat is slowly closed with a boot because he was loitering. All this while, you have been building calluses, but those calluses aren't baton-proof. They are reminders. You will see later on, when people who look like you get routinely beaten and snuffed out in your daily media feed, you'll learn not to expect any I love yous from this world. Yeah, these are sort of hard hitting, guys. I'm sorry. This is some awkwardness. I'm gonna read one more poem about Louisville, and this one I'm reading for Dr. Anderson, who he's in the crowd, and he enlightened me on Joseph S. Carter, who is mentioned in this poem. Recycling the Neighborhood just talks about nothing is indispensable to Louisville. Nothing. Anything is disposable to Louisville, even the original island that Louisville's built on. So just think about that. Recycling the neighborhood. New Park Duval, always just Duval, since I was born. Now rebranded, regentrified, a sugared outer shell of pastel vinyl cloned homes on postage stamp lots, crowding and dashing into interstate obstructed horizons, barred in by the shadows of coal ash smokestacks. Here, backyard gardens grow out of the rubble of plowed over projects. Southwick and Cotter Homes, projects, a 50-year experiment I grew up adjacent to, named for the white developer who always owned this land, and the black mayor of the town sacrificed for this monstrosity of terracotta buildings knotted up and down the single pothole street, dead ending at a police station, where cops were soldiers doing tours of duty in that Little Africa shithole. Little Africa, sometimes called Black Parklands, other times Needmore, forgotten hamlet of freed slaves, self-governed, self-educated, with plank streets, brown brick businesses, wooden cottages crammed and cobbled to the river, community growing like an orange trumpet vine from the bogged black earth of this once bypassed marsh. Ignored, avoided swamp, nameless estuary, too many mosquitoes, too much stink to do anything here, back before emancipation, before Beargrass Creek became our sewer, and it still flowed through the middle of what is now downtown, feeding enough fertile sediment to build the first Louisville upon, before Corn Island, too, got all used up by this city, leaving only a spangle of stones visible when the Ohio River is shrunken by drought. That's recycling the neighborhood, guys. All right, we're gonna get into some funner poems. So I'm largely write about family and place. And so how I write about family, you can write about different things. I decided to write about a couch. This is called The Good Couch. In the living room sat the couch, one of them splurge items, an oatmeal tweed burlap thing purchased spontaneously at Value City. And for the good couch reason, my parents covered it with a sheet of plastic, a foggy, heavy synthetic skin that rustled with every motion. When summer smothered up, scorching hot days back when home AC was a myth to me, something not felt but alluded to on TV, on those simmering evenings, prime time bubbled across blue flickering screens, couch filled to capacity with family, and box fans propped in windows, making our house a convection oven. We would broil on that couch as its transparent epidermis bonded with our bare arms and legs, so that, of course, I would have to wait until the next commercial break, because the sound of me ripping clean from the Velcro couch would have drowned out the TV a bit, and everyone would have thrown a fit, because Cosby might have said something witty in his air-conditioned his air-conditioned brownstone. Sorry, guys. Could not get that word out. Y'all got the gist. So I'm going to continue on this vein of reading about family, and I'm going to read about an important woman in my life. She's not around anymore, but she was the matriarch of our family, and she had a particular dish that the poem was named after. It's called Grandma's Greens. On the forgotten side of Babylon is where Grandma's garden hung, shadowed by silo mountains, in earshot of smoky iron rivers. We left the asphalt to spend the growing season with her. Our young knees bent into turned earth. We built foliage cities of collard, mustard, and turnip by tossing embryos in ancient gridded rows as Grandma chanted incantations, and bushy jade heads sprung from the dirt to swallow sun. The grandbabies' jobs were to harness aluminum clouds, to precipitate on the leaf palaces, to mine weeds with bent tridents, to defend the veiny structures from critters. But once the plants got waist high, Grandma would tell us to decapitate them all, to the altar of kinfolk. And on the rim of dusk, in a screened porch temple, over a carpet of newspaper, we picked the sturdy flesh clean from spindly stalks, squash any bugs, then have her anoint our offerings with her thorough inspection before she marches every emerald bushel into her cauldron of rolling aromatics, roots, and spices. The greens scream a bit, hitting the boiling water. Their leathery texture softens as they drown, sending out an unseen signal to relatives all the way in Newburgh, down to Alabama, Houston, even my home blocks away. The hairs on our necks stand on end when another pot brews, and sooner or later, we find ourselves around a too small table in a too small house, and everyone's just fine. We can't resist the polarity of those steaming plates of Grandma's hocus pocus that passes like an heirloom across several generations. Even after her matriarchal reign, grandbabies and their babies will practice the high art of potioning greens and conjuring family. Thank you. This is a longer poem, guys, so you'll just have to bear with me, but this is a poem, it's called Barber College, and it talks about the many things that you can learn at the Barber College. Let me cut them sticker bushes, boy, said great Aunt Eva, short, sturdy, and smocked in her own barbershop as she placed me in a booster seat. And boy, give me some sugar, too. Her whiskered lips pecked at my toddler cheeks, and then she began excavating my head. I cried. She'd point at the many photographs proliferating across the walls of a broad man who sort of looked like my daddy. See, boy, he's your cousin. See, boy, he's the champ of the world. I look at Daddy, and he'd shrug it off. Then I would whine to leave. One day, Daddy up and said, "Your Aunt Eva never gives the cut I want." So he bought some wall clippers to DIY my head. At the dim kitchen table, no pictures on the wall of anyone here, and with no training, no instruction, Daddy dove in. I heard a lumpish snort before I felt the hot, vibrating razor glance off my skull, before I saw a black cloud of my hair sink into my lap. Then, oops, sorry. Next day, Mama sanctioned Daddy and me on an emergency Sabbath morning haircut to stave off church embarrassment. We went to the Big A strip mall, entered a wood-paneled shrine to U of L Cardinal basketball, and also to that man Aunt Eva called Champ. Every square inch of wall had either a red bird or him, satin-shorted and shirtless with shimmering sepia skin, while on TV played a VHS tape of this poetic warrior boxing through reporters and pundits and peers, his whole career on an infinite loop. When I got seated, the barber asked me loud enough for the whole shop to hear, "You know that you and your daddy are blood with the greatest." He pointed at the TV. I shrugged it off like I was taught to. "Did your daddy not tell you about them?" I shrugged again. Daddy looked away. The barber shook his head and said, "We gonna fix that." Then this blade wielding Homer proceeded to spin an epic tale. This is gonna be in the voice of the barber. Cassius descended from Titans out of the Hades part of Louisville, like you and me and all of us. Said to have Hephaestus' hammer fist, to be as swift as Hermes, especially in the lip, and prettier than Helen. Kidnapped at an early age and trained in Troy by a pantheon of mere men rich off their daddy's inheritance. Their new Achilles, whose heel was having an IQ so low by their design, he could avoid Vietnam. And if he stayed in line, he'd be their next Mr. Bojangles, Jack Johnson. But Cassius wasn't their Atlas for long, though he was a Brown Delphi, predicting, then delivering, listening to the mat and putting his benefactors into a cash coma. And as they slept post-fight, Clay's Trojan horse chest opened and Muhammad Ali coolly strolled out. A soon-to-be black demigod, tongue-launched fiery barbs at the oppressor's press, torching contracts, introducing black folks to self-love, especially after that cabal went after that heel of his. But that's another odyssey for your next cut, young one. There's almost a standing ovation when he finishes, and I yearn to stay in the chair and hear more from this stage. But Daddy is already paying, and he interjects, "All he did was trade one master for another. That shows how weak-minded he was, changing the family name and all." Everyone gets quiet. The barber curls his lip in disbelief and says, "You just jealous, because you still got that Clay money, which ain't shit compared to that Ali money." And the shop erupts in laughter and jeers at my daddy, who sort of smiles, gives an almost defeated nod, then tips the man as he slinks out the door. So I didn't realize that Muhammad Ali was my cousin until I got to the barbershop and was like, oh, and I realized this dude is really famous. So I lived with my dad after my parents got divorced. I went to go live with him to learn how to be a man because, supposedly I couldn't live with my mom. I had to go live with my dad to learn how to be a man. I learned a few things. This is one of the lessons I learned. Daddy would be like, used to wait months for a haircut. Daddy played chicken with that shapeless blob atop my head gaining mass. I'd plead with Daddy that I needed a fade. Daddy would be like, when I was your age, I had an afro 2 times bigger. Mine's grew for years, not no months, and it was beautiful. Really, Dad? It was the 70s and afros were in style, so I scrimped and saved my lunch money until I bought a taming pick. Used to have 3 days worth of school fits, and when they started disintegrating, Daddy handed me down his outdated grown man business attire, sending me to school swimming in the deep end of polyester shirts and belled slacks. I'd get kicked out of class on purpose to avoid the ridicule. I'd beg for new kid-sized gear. Daddy would be like, them clothes are sharp, boy. Besides, who are you trying to impress anyway? I don't know, Dad. I'm a preteen male going through puberty, so maybe girls? After my knockoff Eastlands fell apart on my feet, Daddy spray painted these canvas white clearance rack boots shiny shit brown and made me wear them to school. Their glossy coating bubbled and cracked, leaving a brown flake trail through school to me. I'd come home crying. Daddy would be like, you just gonna outgrow them things in 6 months anyway. Besides, if they were your true friends, no shit, Dad. So I became a juvenile cobbler, duct taping the integrity back into those exploded boat shoes that I secretly wore for the rest of the school year. Used to see Daddy in front of a mirror before work, closet rupturing with clothes, his hair freshly cut, his shoes gleaming, and as he smiled, staring into the mirror, chanting this mantra, I'm 6'2", bronze skin, wavy black hair, built like a Greek god, good God. And I would respond, Dad, what's up with this? I got no kicks, no fit, no fade. Daddy would be like, boy, if you want something, then you work you 50 hours a week and you get you a 9 to 5. Then you can do whatever the hell you want. My reply, Dad, I'm only 13. He would just smile and take me to Mickey D's for a 4-piece nugget. I tried to tie it all together for somebody. I was telling about Daddy the other day, explaining, yeah, it was rough, but I think he was trying to make me better, less shallow, you know? And that person was like, nope, it just sounds like you got a cheap-ass daddy. Thank you. I am willing to take some questions now. If you have any questions, for a little Q&A. If you have any questions over anything that I read or anything about me or about the book, yes, sir. My favorite place to write? So I like writing in the car, to be honest. Like when we're traveling, like I do a lot of that, but most of the time I'm just like a on the spot type person. I'll write down stuff and then I'll save special time to go and revise whatever I've written down, like on the fly. Like I have little journals and things where I write stuff and jot them down. And then when I get to like, hey, I'm gonna create a piece, I go to my desk, and so I'm very regimented, and if I'm typing something for real, I'm at my desk with my computer in my office. But I live in Berea, so there's a huge window by my desk, and I can look out and see mountains and stuff. So that's a good thing. Yes, sir.
How long was the conception period from idea to what we have here today?
That's a good question. So the first poem that I wrote for this book is I Chill, and I wrote that in 1994. So the rev up for this book starts then. I was talking to my friend Tanika, who owns all my chapbooks. I released like about 4 or 5 different chapbooks throughout college where I was writing collections for a year, so I would collect those. My editor now saw those books back in 2000 and was like, hey, we should do a book together. And I disappeared until like 2015, and I showed back up for my MFA program. She was like, I still want to do the book. And I was like, okay, here's what I'll do. I'll write some poems to help enhance some of the stuff. So the real startup time was probably 2015 to now. It took about 5 years to get it all developed and hammered out.
One follow-up question. And so once you got to that state, how long did it take for you to realize that what you had conceived in your mind initially had become something different?
It was immediate. I mean, like as soon as I start working with somebody else on it, it's already going to become something different than I intended. So working with my editor on it, to be honest, I would say like she sort of helped co-write this because it was her and I that sort of worked out the order and stuff, and I was thinking this was going to be like a coming of age memoir type thing. And I almost wanted to do it chronologically, and she was like, no, let's not do it chronologically. And so we played around with multiple iterations of order and stuff. But I mean, with poetry, it's always like you take the pieces, the sum of the whole, and they make up that whole, right? So like, as you're assembling this collection, you realize, oh, what I'm creating is not what I intended, right? It's always going to get bigger than what you thought because you're not, maybe some people do this, like they can conceive a whole collection, but I was sort of just like trying to build a collection from stuff that already existed and pieces that I sort of knew. And so, yeah, it's definitely a realization that you can't deliberately and like put your intent on your collection. You sort of have to go with the flow of what happens. Or at least that's what I did. I'm not so rigid that I was like, oh, it must be like this. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Let's try that. So.
Where does this take you to now? You've completed this. Is there another thematic follow-up that you're going to do, or is it something that's because of this now you're going to take off in a whole different direction?
So my wife is a herbalist, but I'm also into herbs and growing stuff naturally. And so I don't know if you ever heard of a bestiary or herbarary. They're like these books that you have pictures of stuff and it tells you stuff and how to plant stuff. Well, I want to do a poetic version of a herbiary, but from the perspective of Underground Railroad slaves. So talk about how they use the herbs and what herbs they use, and then I might even try to draw connections to the African herbs that they are trying to replace. So I want to do something like that. I know it's going to take a lot of research, which is like a challenge for me because I'm not nerdy research. Nerd is not bad. I'm not research oriented. So I respect people who can do that, and I probably need some help from people who do that, so I might have to find that. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking. But I would love to write some short stories based around my family and my extended family also too. So I have a lot of little things that I'm thinking about, but nothing set in stone yet. But thanks for the question, I appreciate it. Any other questions? Yes, Dr. Hanch.
This follows what you were just saying because there are a handful of poems in English lit that talk about your love of nature.
Yes.
And in particular, by the end, I think really after the Tark poem, the nature poems really begin to enter the collection. So could you kind of talk about your love of nature, the work that you do, because that's clearly important.
Well, yes. So, were y'all listening when I read the Grandma's Greens? Like, I have a number of poems where the women in my life, my mother, my grandmother, they sort of put me out into the outside world and let me become whatever. And so that's sort of where I learned to appreciate nature. I have a poem in there called When I First Met Myself, and that just talks about the first time I remember being outside. And my mom had a garden then. Like, she had a garden then. She was in outside. So we would always take hikes. I remember we would take family hikes to the Bernheim. We would go, I have a poem in there called Iroquois Park, where my mom would take us to Iroquois Park instead of church. We would cut out on church and we would go up Iroquois Park and run up the hill. I mean, these are all things that sort of like were ingrained in me early. And so I think being exposed to that stuff early, even though I lived in the city, gave me appreciation for it. And I mean, maybe I romanticized it a little bit because I lived in the city and thought it was like this great thing. Now that I live out there now, it's sort of, but but like, you know, the actual things of nature, especially fauna and flora, like those are the things that I could just sit out in my garden for hours and just piddle away days. So it's been something that I think was instilled into me by people in my life, but it's something that I took and ran with. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you. You mentioned that going to a predominantly white institution.
Yes.
How did your acceptance and support from your white peers either hamper or help you?
Well, surprisingly, I actually got a lot of support from my white peers for the most part, especially in poetry, maybe not in fiction. They were a little cutthroat in fiction, but in poetry, I definitely got decent feedback from most people. There were definitely, like, I have this poem, I meant to read this poem and I should have read it. I have this poem about the Jefferson Davis statue in the Capitol. And I read it in my MFA program, and it's not in the slightest bit, like, angry. But one of the guys was like, I'm sensing anger from this. Like, I'm getting some anger vibes from this. And it's like, no, it's not anger, it's like absurdity. Like, why is this dude in here? It's like, I'm not upset at all. It's like, this is stupidity. Anyway, so yeah, I ran into, like I said, the otherness. That's where English Lit came from. Like, literally a teacher told me, it doesn't look like you got out of second grade. Like, he told me, he was like, your grammar is bad. And I was like, dang, he's trying to make me cry. Too bad I don't care. I did care, but not enough to cry. So yeah, like, it is real. It is real, the stuff that you feel. But I didn't paint all white people in that brush, because there were actual white people in the classes also that helped me. So you sort of have to find your crew or people to listen to. Like, there are people that I listen to, but I was lucky enough to have, like, Frank X. Walker, Dr. Kelly Ellis, Crystal Wilkinson, Nikki Finney. They were all at UK when I went. And so Mitchell Douglas. So like, having those people there sort of gave me a little bit of something. You know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't really need the validation from these people, because I was already getting validation from these people who I had immense respect for. So I'm talking your ears off, guys. Do y'all want any more questions? Any more answers? Yes, ma'am.
First, thank you for coming today. I'm really happy that I got to hear you, because all your books are checked out in all libraries.
Oh, seriously?
Except one. So.
Whoa.
My question is, do you have any insight or advice for local artists who are exhausted by the process of selling our trauma to white audiences and publications while simultaneously trying to survive the realities of that trauma every day?
Dang, you went for it. I love it. So all I can talk about is from my perspective, right? I don't like to speak in absolutes about anybody, black people, white people, anything. So I just want to, from my perspective, it's rough. The reason why it took me so long to release this book, I've been writing, is because of that. Because I did not want exploitation of the trauma, because there's definite trauma there. The thing is, like, with poetry, or with how you present your art, you can sort of control it a little bit, how much you expose. So there's definitely some rawer poems. Oh, sorry. There's definitely some rawer poems that I didn't put in there because I just didn't want to be that vulnerable. We definitely live in a society where that I just didn't want to like, there was certain times when she wanted me to put certain poems in, and I was like, no, that's just trauma porn. Like, I don't want to put this in just to put it in. And so I think you have to, like, work with people, Work with people that are going to listen to you and collaborate with you. And only put out what you want to put out. Only put out what you're comfortable reading in front of people. Like when I read my poems, people feel uncomfortable. They don't feel right about the trauma sometimes, or they don't feel right about what I'm saying about society as a whole. But if you put it in a way to where it's accessible, at least I give them a chance to make their decision on it, right? But I don't feel like I'm being exploited for that. I feel like I'm just putting it out there in a way. I think you have to temper what you release. I think what you're asking me is like, how much of myself should I expose to the world? And I think that's totally up to you and what you're comfortable doing. And the way to fill that out is by doing readings, open mic readings, workshops, workshopping it with people, different people, not just the same people, people of different backgrounds. Like, all that stuff is going to help. It's going to be scary, but that stuff helps, and the more you expose it to an audience, depending on how wide an audience you want, I mean, that's going to drive it. If you're like, hey, I only want to read this to, the kids of this neighborhood, I mean, you can create a chat book and talk to Natalie. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's ways to shrink down your audience. So that's a good question. It's a thing that I struggled with. You definitely can be exploited for the experiences that we have, for our blackness. I like to think that I'm not, but I can't say that. Like, I have a press over me and another press. So they are making money off of me. But I'm hoping that I'm spreading awareness about a culture, an experience here in Louisville, and I hope that outweighs the exploitation that's happening. Ah.